They spent their whole lives growing the one thing the world could not live without, but had never tasted it themselves. In a small village in Ivory Coast, surrounded by rust-colored soil and towering cocoa trees, a mother once asked her son, "Do you think chocolate tastes like the beans we dry?" He didn't know. She didn't either. Because for generations, African hands have carried the weight of the global chocolate industry, without ever knowing its flavor. Every year, the world spends over $130 billion on chocolate. But the ones who grow the cocoa, who cut, dry, and sort the beans under a relentless sun, live on less than $2 a day. This is not just an injustice. It is theft, dressed up as trade. But now, something is changing. A quiet rebellion has begun. It does not carry guns. It carries flavor. It does not raise flags. It raises bars. If that makes your heart beat faster, if you've ever questioned who gets to profit from your sweet tooth, then like, share, and subscribe. Because what you're about to hear is not just about chocolate. It's about taking back power, one bite at a time. In New York, a single artisan chocolate bar sells for $12. In London, they sip cocoa at marble cafes, tracing flavors like wine, nutty, bitter, floral, French. Meanwhile, in Ghana and Ivory Coast, the source of over 60% of the world's cocoa, farmers pray that prices do not drop another cent this week. Why? Because they do not set the price of their own harvest. That power lives in far-off cities, behind trading desks, where no one smells the soil after rain. For decades, Africa has fed the world's sweet cravings. And gotten only crumbs in return. But in one village, a question was asked. What if we don't ship it raw anymore? And from that question, the African chocolate revolution was born. It did not begin in a boardroom. It began under a mango tree. In a village called Dupé, no streetlights, no paved roads, but thousands of cocoa trees, a group of 15 people gathered, 11 women, 4 men. Most of them barefoot. All of them tired. And all of them done with waiting. For years, they had watched trucks haul away their beans, truckloads of value, of labor, of history, sold off to companies they would never see. Converted into chocolate they would never taste. And one day, a woman named Alamada said what no one had dared say aloud. If they can turn our beans into chocolate, why can't we? That single question split the silence of centuries. They had no factory. No shiny machines. No consultants, no permission. But they had courage. They had clay ovens. They had a borrowed rice grinder. And they had banana leaves to wrap the chocolate they were about to make. The first bar was rough. Uneven. Bitter on the edges, soft in the center. But when a young boy bought one for his mother, she cried. Not because it was sweet, but because for the first time, someone stood to buy what she made. That changed everything. The bars sold for 600 CFA francs, $1. A single dollar. But it was more than income. It was validation. It was revolution wrapped in green leaves. They called it Nzora, a word meaning dignity in the local tongue. And that name spread, like fire on dry savanna. A graphic design student in Abidjan saw a photo and offered to make a logo. A chemistry teacher from Yamoussoukro came to help adjust the roasting profile. A wedding planner replaced imported Swiss candy with Nzora bars. For the first time, people began to believe that Ivory Coast could make chocolate, not just grow what others profited from. Nzora became more than chocolate. It became proof. Proof that the value could stay here. Proof that pride could be tasted. When Ibrahim Traoré arrived in Dupé, he did not come with speeches. He came with silence. And then one sentence. You have done what they told you was impossible. Now, let us show the world. He walked the fields with the women who made the first bars. He knelt beside the fire pits. He tasted every flavor, dark plantain, baobab, samkara spice. The samkara bar hit him hardest. Named after a revolutionary who once said, "He who feeds you controls you." And now, the people were feeding themselves. And they were feeding something else too. Hope. The first official Nzora cooperative opened 6 weeks later. But it did not look like a Western factory. It was a shared workshop. A clay-roofed, hand-built space with shelves of beans, racks of bars, solar ovens humming in the sun. Children brought cocoa pods from their grandparents' trees. Young girls in school uniforms volunteered on weekends to wrap bars in printed paper stamped, "Made in Ivory Coast, tasted by Africa." The movement attracted a quiet force. A former cocoa trader who quit his job in Paris to teach bean fermentation back home. A Ghanaian mechanic who built a roasting drum out of a repurposed oil barrel. A filmmaker from Nigeria who began documenting each step, calling it the rise of the real. Every act, every hand involved, became a vote against dependence. But something else happened, something no one expected. For years, African farmers had been told, "You're not ready. Your chocolate won't sell. Your packaging isn't clean enough. Your taste is too different." And suddenly, those lies began to crack. Because when a mother tastes chocolate made from her own tree, she does not need approval from Brussels. When a boy in Bamako posts a selfie holding a chocolate bar labeled "Proudly African," he's not asking for a review from The Guardian. They no longer needed permission to be excellent. At a small summit held under a cocoa tree, Traoré stood up and said, "We grow the cocoa. We should decide its value. We will not die as farmers and be reborn as slaves. We will make it. We will taste it. And we will keep the sweetness for ourselves." And in that moment, something shifted. Not in the air, but in the mindset of a continent. If you believe a mother should taste the fruit of her labor, if you believe chocolate should be more than colonial legacy wrapped in foil, then tell us what you think. Leave a comment. Let your voice be one of many. Chocolate is no longer a luxury imported from far-off lands. It is now a symbol of something larger. A continent claiming its right to create. A people taking back the taste of their future. The chocolate began to move. Not just across villages, but across borders. From the dirt roads of Dupé to the city streets of Abidjan. From Ghana's highlands to Nigeria's coast, chocolate made by Africans, for Africans, started appearing in local shops, wedding gift boxes, school canteens. The wrappers bore new names. Inzora. Taifa. Moko. Rising Root. Bars flavored not with almond or caramel, but with dried baobab, roasted plantain, fermented chili, cola bark, flavors born of soil and song. In Senegal, tourists were now taking cocoa origin tours. In Lagos, chefs paired Nigerian chocolate with traditional suya. In Accra, Instagram lit up with the hashtag from beans to power. And in every photo, one thing stood out. Pride. Pride that had long been denied. Pride that was always traded away with the raw beans, along with control, credit, and currency. But now, for the first time in modern history, African cocoa was not leaving the continent in chains. It was staying, being shaped, and sold with the fingerprints of its people. In a factory in Ghana, a 24-year-old woman with a welding visor engraved, "My beans, my rules," built a new roasting chamber. In Ivory Coast, a law student launched a legal cooperative to help chocolate startups navigate new trade barriers. In Togo, elders blessed the opening of the country's first village-to-bar workshop, chanting songs once sung only during harvest. The movement was no longer small. It was a quiet thunder. A shift so steady, the world could no longer ignore it. And so, in Yamoussoukro, the beating heart of cocoa country, they gathered. Leaders from Ghana, Togo, Burkina Faso, Senegal, and Nigeria. Farmers. Engineers. Economists. Poets. Under a tent made from cocoa sacks, beside a field of young saplings, they made a declaration. No cocoa bean shall leave Africa unless it becomes something more. Something worthy of the hands that touched it. The crowd roared. Not in celebration, but in defiance. Because they knew what came next. They knew the West would not be silent. And they were right. The backlash came like fog. Quiet at first, then thick, suffocating. European food agencies suddenly raised safety concerns. Chocolate bars from Africa were stopped at ports. New inspections were added. Cocoa must meet new standards, they said. African flavors are too experimental, they warned. You lack the refining capacity, they claimed. But the truth was written in their panic. Africa had begun keeping its sweetness. And that, more than anything, was a threat. In Zurich, the CEO of a global chocolate giant said in a leaked email, "If we lose access to raw beans, we lose our pricing power." In Brussels, diplomats whispered, "If they make their own chocolate, what's next? Coffee, cotton, gold." And they were right to worry. Because in Accra, students had already opened a textile lab making clothes from local cotton. In Ethiopia, musicians were launching African-owned streaming platforms. In Kenya, entrepreneurs were roasting Kenyan coffee, labeling it, not for export, for us. Ibrahim Traoré watched it all unfold, not from a palace, but from the production floor of a chocolate cooperative. There, in work boots and cocoa-stained sleeves, he whispered to a group of students, "They are not afraid of our chocolate. They are afraid we've remembered who we are." The crowd erupted not with applause, but with silence. The kind of silence that follows truth. The kind of silence that signals a turning tide. That week, 4 new projects launched. A research center for chocolate science in Bouak. A mobile app tracking cocoa beans from farm to bar. A West African chocolate distribution network. And the boldest, the Pan-African Cocoa Reserve Fund. Designed to stabilize prices, support farmers, and free the market from London's grip, the fund was a dagger to the heart of colonial economics. One headline in the Financial Times read, "Cocoa Shock, Africa Rejects Raw Export Model." But in the streets of Bamako, painted on a wall beneath a boy eating an inzora bar, were 5 simple words. No more exports without excellence. If you believe that chocolate should no longer be a symbol of silence, but of strength, then speak. Leave a comment. What flavor would your country's chocolate have? What stories should it carry? And if this revolution moved you, share it. Because this isn't just Africa's story. It's a message for every place that ever gave too much and got too little back. This is not just a change in supply chains. It is a shift in soul. A new doctrine is being written in beans, not ink. And for the first time in modern history, the continent that grows the cocoa is finally tasting the power it always held. The revolution no longer needed speeches. It spoke through action. In Ghana, solar panels hummed above cocoa factories built by teenagers who once dreamed of migrating to Europe. In Nigeria, fashion designers wrapped artisan chocolate bars inside Kent-patterned boxes, sold as wedding gifts, festival centerpieces, tokens of heritage. In Senegal, cocoa tours began where elders told stories of trade routes, ancestors, and the taste of land once taken. Everywhere, chocolate had become more than a treat. It had become a language of self-worth. But the movement did not stop at the wrapper. It dug deeper. It asked the bigger question. If we can do this with cocoa, what else have we been giving away? And suddenly, the dam broke. Cotton, once shipped raw and returned as overpriced suits, was now dyed and tailored in Dakar. Coffee, once roasted in Europe and sold back for 10 times its value, was now ground fresh in Addis cafes bearing the slogan, "Our land, our roast." Gold, once stored in foreign vaults, was being minted into local currency and jewelry bearing African motifs. Even ideas were returning home. Musicians reclaimed stolen beats. Storytellers wrote in indigenous languages. Filmmakers stopped chasing Western distribution and started streaming stories from servers based in Kenya. It was as if a switch had flipped. And the continent was finally saying, "We are not just the roots. We are the bloom." In Burkina Faso, a new school curriculum was introduced. From raw to real. Teenagers were taught how to design machines, write export contracts, and tell their stories through branding. A boy named Kudugu created a chocolate flavor inspired by desert herbs his grandmother used for tea. His first batch sold out in a day. Not because it was sweet, but because it was sovereign. Across Africa, young people stopped asking, "Can I leave?" and started asking, "What can I build?" Villages that once only had one job, grow beans, now had 10. Sorting, roasting, wrapping, designing. marketing, transport, sales, flavor innovation, quality control, cultural preservation. A chocolate bar now told 100 stories. In the city of Buak, a group of women opened a research lab focused entirely on chocolate science. They studied fermentation, temperature curves, soil profiles. One of them, Adama, had never finished high school, but now stood before diplomats explaining the microbiology of cocoa enzymes. And they listened. Because she did not speak in theory. She spoke in flavor. Her chocolate was earthy, rich, unapologetic. It was the taste of land that refuses to be colonized again. In Abuja, a 14-year-old named Sei coded a blockchain system tracking chocolate from farm to market. The tagline, "No middleman, no mystery." In Lomé, the country's first chocolate museum opened. Its first exhibit was not about taste, but memory. Of grandparents who never knew what their beans became. Of hands that built fortunes for others. Of voices once excluded from the table, now hosting the feast. And in the sky, literally, the revolution soared. Ethiopian Airlines began serving African-made chocolate on its flights. South African Airways followed. And one day, on a flight to Nairobi, a child asked, "Was this made here?" The flight attendant smiled. "Yes. It tastes like home now." If you've ever believed that where something comes from should shape where its value stays. If you think a continent that grows should also taste, touch, and profit from its gifts, then share this story. And tell us in the comments. What flavor does your freedom have? The chocolate bars kept evolving. Some were bold and spicy. Others smooth and sweet. Some bitter, intentionally so. Because this was not about copying European palates. It was about speaking truth through taste. A reporter from Berlin once asked Ibrahim Traoré, "Do you really believe chocolate can change Africa?" He smiled. "No," he said. "I believe Africa is changing chocolate." And behind him, a new batch cooled. Ready not for export, but for recognition. Recognition that Africa is not just rising. It is redefining the table itself. Power never leaves quietly. Especially not $130 billion worth of it. At first, the resistance was subtle. A few rejected shipments. A new certification law. An EU memo citing public safety concerns about the sanitary protocols of rural African chocolate facilities. Then came the pressure. Interest rates on cocoa loans quietly rose. Currency warnings were issued by international banks. Foreign aid packages were reassessed. And finally, came the sabotage. In Ivory Coast, a fire broke out at a chocolate cooperative warehouse, just days before its first shipment to Dubai. In Ghana, customs seized bars labeled non-compliant. In Senegal, 3 chocolate startups had their international bank accounts frozen overnight. And in the shadows, a document leaked. A confidential directive from a European trade bloc. Reduce incentives for domestic cocoa processing in West Africa. Maintain favorable conditions for raw bean exports. Apply pressure through regulatory, monetary, and diplomatic channels. Translation. Starve the roots before the tree bears too much fruit. They tried to silence the movement not with bullets, but with bureaucracy. Not with bombs, but with forms. Not with soldiers, but with spreadsheets and suspicion. Headlines began to shift. Africa's chocolate gamble backfires. Dupé's dream melts in global heat. Samkara spice bar triggers trade controversy. Media campaigns funded by international food councils began painting African chocolate as inferior, unregulated, risky. A market once celebrating local innovation suddenly turned cold. Buyers pulled back. Shelves emptied. Doubt crept in. But then, the people responded. Not with panic. Not with protests. But with planting. In Dupé, they gathered under moonlight and whispered. If they burn 10 trees, we plant 100. In Ghana, a billboard appeared. They fear our flavor, because it tells the truth. In Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré stood before a scorched factory and said, They thought they were burning buildings. But they were only lighting our belief. And in Lagos, a shopkeeper wrote on her shutter, "We do not retreat. We roast." If you've ever been told that your dreams are too raw, too rough, too strange, remember this. They do not fear your weakness. They fear your flavor. If this moment stirred something in you, like, comment, and subscribe. Because no revolution survives alone. Share this story, not because it is perfect, but because it is real. Because it is ours. The African chocolate revolution had been tested. And it did not melt. It tempered. Stronger. Darker. Ready. One bean. That was all it took. One bean, grown in silence. Dried in heat. Forgotten by markets. Until someone, somewhere, asked, "Why can't we taste what we grow?" And that question cracked something open. Not just cocoa pods. But minds. Borders. Histories. The African chocolate revolution is not just about chocolate. It is about the return of value. About remembrance. About the power to define what worth means. This story began with raw beans. But it ends, no, it continues, with bold flavor. Flavor that says, we are not just the soil. We are the soul. If the spirit of this revolution touched you, do not let it end here. Like. Comment. Subscribe. Because what began in one village belongs now to all of us. And now, it is our turn. To taste. To build. To rise. Together, we keep the flavor. Together, we keep the power.